Operational resilience used to be a back office concern, but not anymore. With the Digital Operational Resilience Act, or DORA, a regulatory framework now in full effect across the EU, regulated entities across the financial sector, big or small, must prove that its digital operational infrastructure is strong enough to withstand disruptions, including third-party service failures and cyber attacks. The problem? Many organizations still don't know what their regulatory obligations are and how to implement these into tangible, actionable processes day to day. Today, we're unpacking what the DORA framework really requires of financial entities, what these firms are struggling with, and how they can make regulatory compliance and reporting a competitive advantage rather than an internal challenge.
Hi, and welcome to Wealth Insider, a podcast by Performativ. This is where industry meets insight, where we sit down for honest and engaging conversations with voices from every corner of the financial world. Together, we explore trends, strategies, and partnerships that are shaping the future of wealth management. Wealth Insider brings you closer to the people and the ideas that are driving the industry forward.
I'm Christian Lindvall, Global Commercial Director at Performativ, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Marissa Weiss, who handles sales and partnerships at Performativ, along with being our product specialist for DORA Edge. Marissa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Very happy to be here today.
So maybe to kick things off, can you tell us about your role at Performativ? I think you've had kind of a unique experience. You're doing both sales and partnerships on the core product, but you've also been the product specialist for DORA Edge itself.
So I think it's been very interesting, kind of the development and how I've gotten involved with DORA Edge. So on the commercial team at Performativ, of course, we're supporting independent wealth managers and wealth businesses at large financial institutions in modernizing their wealth businesses and being able to better support their clients who are high net worth individuals, family offices, et cetera. So with that in mind, all of our clients are regulated financial entities, and they're all subject to the DORA framework, so the Digital Operational Resilience Act that went into effect in January of this year. And with that, in 2024, we were hearing from our clients, what do I need to do to be compliant with the DORA regulation? What's my obligation? What is the level of coverage that I need from a compliance perspective? And we decided to actually expand our expertise and build a standalone platform called DORA Edge to help not just our clients, so regulated financial entities specializing in wealth, but also across the entire sector with managing their obligations that relate to the DORA regulation. So with that said, I'm working with regulated entities within our wealth business, but also across other sectors of the industry as well, in starting to build their compliance programs and then starting to actually fulfill their obligations with the framework.
So let's set the scene. What is DORA and why is it game-changing for the financial industry?
So DORA stands for the Digital Operational Resilience Act. It's a widespread regulatory framework that went into effect in January of 2025. And it hits the entire financial sector. So while there have been other regulations or frameworks in place that have hit maybe critical providers or aspects of the sector, it's the first one where every single regulated entity must comply with it. As a part of that, we've built DORA Edge to enable any regulated financial entity comply with the regulation. It has really widespread implications because it directly impacts the regulated entities themselves, but it also indirectly impacts any ICT provider, which is an information communication technology provider. So that could be Amazon, that could be Google, but it could also be any small outsourced provider that a regulated entity might leverage within the process of delivering their services.
What are the key pillars of the regulation and what do firms need to be compliant with?
So it's really widespread again, but it's anything relating to their digital infrastructure. So first and foremost, they must have a really strong grasp on any sort of system or solution that they leverage internally, but also in terms of outsourcing to third parties. So it's that ICT risk management, it's vendor management for those third-party providers. It's ensuring that if there is a disruption or an incident that occurs within that chain, that they do have a handle on resolving it quickly. So the digital operational resilience element of it, and that comes in the form of being able to test that infrastructure in a resiliency capacity. They also must then manage those incidents and then learn from them too. So the last pillar is comprehensive, and it says that we need to become more intelligent and actually practice information sharing so that we can learn, mitigate, and then be stronger for the future.
So maybe we can zero in on incident reporting. How detailed do organizations need to be in that regard?
It's comprehensive in the sense that there's quite a lot of conditions that go into how you can define a major ICT incident. So again, that could be a network outage, that could be potential threat to data, right? So anything that could go into effect, it could be natural disaster related, it could actually be a cyber attack. But if there's any sort of inhibition for a regulated entity to provide their services to clients, then that will be categorized as an incident, but determined if it's major or non-major is a really important distinction as a part of the reporting process. It also will then impact the requirements for when you need to report by, the severity to which you need to then mitigate that, and stay on top of that incident. So some of those factors could be geographical spread, the outage time, the amount of jurisdictions, so different countries within the EU that are impacted by the outage or disruption. All of that goes into how you can then define it and then the reporting implications from there. So for any major incident, there is really in-depth technical standards in terms of what you need to report on. But what we've done within the platform is try to help entities get through that process much more quickly. So with that, we've sourced a ton of data that you already have on your supply chain directly into the reporting module, and then also built in the time limit so you never fall behind in terms of when you submit your report.
So with a regulation like DORA, it's really disrupting the financial sector in a way because it's new. That always happens. And we were, I think, surprised to see that it's actually meant to cover 22,000 financial entities, but only 38% of those actually have risk management technology or are focused on it. And that's the gap that DORA is meant to close, right?
Absolutely. So obviously with regulation, there becomes the focus on the governance, right? So the programs that you build to ensure that you have the right policies and procedures in place. So that's one element of it, which is going through and making sure that if it says that you have a business continuity plan in place, to cover any sort of risk that might happen in that regard, does the organization actually practice that, right? So one, do they have a procedure or a plan that will say what they do? And then have they actually implemented that internally? So it's a little bit of a yes or no. If the regulator ends up asking, let me see your plan, does it actually fit the size and scope of your organization? Of course, it's on the individual entity to ensure that it does. But a really big part of the regulation is also the effort and exercise that it makes entities do in terms of mapping out their ICT network. So that's what I talked about before with having the third-party vendor management, recording every single ICT provider that you work with, every single asset that you manage internally. So an example of this would be our wealth management clients. If they use the Performativ core platform, they need to mark Performativ as critical and discuss how we will then ensure that we will maintain, our infrastructure and prove that we are resilient in case there is a disruption to our technology and our ability to provide that service. But also, how do they manage the Performativ platform internally, and what internal critical business functions does it actually enable them to then to offer externally to their clients? So that could be, actually providing the service to their clients from a relationship perspective, anything that's licensed, but in particular for them, it would be the ability to actually execute investments. So there is that really big exercise, but then it's also knowing, okay, well, Performativ uses a cloud hosting provider because Performativ is an on-cloud, cloud native solution. So that is a critically dependent subcontractor of ours. So what are the implications in case there is an outage or disruption to that rank 2 provider within their stack? So from that regard, it is really comprehensive. So it is the policy side of it, which is then ensuring that you have all of the right mitigations in place, right? So you have actually the governance programs, and they're not just static pieces of paper that are uploaded to a SharePoint folder and given access to all of the employees, and then they email HR or IT and say, yes, I have confirmed that I have read through this and comply and agree. But it's actually in practice, how do those play out? But then too, so if there is an incident, how do you go about actually resolving that from the lens of, do we have enough focus on or a handle on the providers that we then work with internally and the assets that we maintain as well?
So maybe now a good time to pivot to the technology side of things. So we at Performativ have built DORA Edge. You have been a huge part of that. What does the platform do?
The platform covers most of the regulation in the sense that we want to help be that centralized platform where entities can track their entire ICT network and manage their governance program. We are that centralized hub that really then links all of the cross-functional teams internally. So it's not just a compliance platform. It's not just a tool for legal. It's not just a tool for vendor management and IT. It really is one shared space where all of that documentation lives and is live, and thus is then utilized in a very automatic way to build that reporting output that is needed for the regulation. So from that, we have the skeleton of the platform, which I believe is the ICT network. So it's tracking your entire network of what is your entity structure, what are those critical functions that you manage internally, who are the providers that you leverage, and what are those internal assets that you manage too. So it tracks all of that. And then on top of it, enables you to dynamically use that information to track risks, to track and manage incidents, and then provide that reporting output for those requirements, but also for the register of information that is required to be submitted annually as well. A lot of our clients have come on in and really adopted the platform to be the foundation of their governance programs. As you were saying before, there are 22,000 entities who are impacted, and 38% have risk management programs or governance programs in place. This has been the defining regulation where I think a lot of entities are shaping up and realizing, oh, okay, so the regulators are going to require me to prove my compliance and that I'm obliging to my obligations here, complying with my obligations. So with that, this is a tool where entities can come on in, take stock of their ICT programs, or ICT vendors, their risk management programs, their governance, and all put that into one platform for dynamic use across their organization.
So we really are giving these organizations like a single pane of glass.
Yep.
To look at these things. Can you give a real life use case?
Yeah, we're working with some smaller entities, like I mentioned, for the first time ever, they're being serious about the criticality of regulation and the impacts it has on their organizations, but also with very mature global insurance companies. So we're working with a few large international firms, but with, in particular, a few of their individual entities who are responsible for managing their entire ICT network and reporting themselves. So we're working with them, again, in a super cross-functional way to say, okay, how can we bridge the gap between maybe some disparate systems that they already have or separate spreadsheets, and they were pulling all this data, and they're actually super happy to have a standalone place where they can manage all of this and feel really confident that when it comes to fulfilling their obligations for DORA and their reporting requirements, all they need to do is log into DORA Edge, and the entire cross-functional team within their organization has that visibility. So I think the use cases that we're covering are really quite broad, but everything that we're doing, our North Stars, to ensure that any regulated entity that uses DORA Edge is 100% compliant based upon the obligations that they have. Of course, up to them in terms of the scope and size of their organization and how they interpret the regulation. That is a nuanced decision they need to make, but all of the technology enables them to do that for what fits their organization best.
Do these organizations, since it's a new regulation, do they consider this a one-time setup, or do they understand that this is a continuous cycle?
They see that, okay, so the first overhaul or the first major milestone was submitting their register of information in April. And that was when everyone really stepped up to the plate, a little baseball analogy there, and said that, okay, we're actually in this, right? We will be required to submit by a certain date. Now they have the data in there, and they are using it every single day for their monitoring and management of their ICT network and their governance programs. And the beautiful thing about using the platform is that they then, at a click of a button, when it comes to the next reporting deadline next March, they just need to hit generate register of information, validate that all of the data is linking appropriately to match the data point model format, and they can then submit to the regulators. So I think they are seeing this as not just a one-time annual event, but they will be held responsible to submit a register of information, prove that they have strong policy and procedure programs in place to fulfill their obligations. And I think they see this as, anytime there's a new regulation, it is, okay, what is the longevity of it? But I actually really do think because DORA hits the entire sector and it's heightening the overall resilience of the financial sector and the ICT network supply chain that they then need to outsource to really step up, and everyone will be held to the standard moving forward. So Performativ, we're a critical provider to many of our wealth management clients, And as an ICT provider in that capacity, we have also stepped up with our security and the way that we will ensure that we will be resilient. If there happens to be something outside of our control, we actually have control of it to be able to stop it and ensure that none of our clients are impacted.
Maybe to the point of stepping up to the plate, getting compliant with this new regulation, what are the ramifications of not being compliant?
Not being compliant means that if the regulator comes to you, they can fine you, right? And there's up to a certain threshold of annual earnings that you might be responsible to pay for. But I think there's a huge reputational risk, right? I think it is not just a differentiator or competitive advantage in time for a financial entity to be DORA compliant. So every single ICT provider and every single regulated financial entity is required to now follow this. And it will be a big inhibitor to doing business if an ICT provider cannot prove that they can support regulated financial entities to the heightened standards that DORA says they need to, but also for a regulated financial entity to their clients and their customers directly if they also don't have their programs in place to ensure that they are fully complying with the regulation.
So what do you think the broader impact of the regulation will be in the EU and beyond?
The regulation now directly impacts any regulated financial entity with operations in the EU. But if there is an ICT provider that offers services to those regulated entities and they're based elsewhere, it will also impact them. So I think as we think about globalization and geographic expansion for entities, either financially or the ICT providers, there will be larger implications where this regulation will not just be isolated in the EU. So it is something that, if there's an Asian AI disruptor or an American cloud hosting hyperscaler, right? If they want to offer services to regulated financial entities in the EU, this regulation will also directly impact their governance programs and how they are resilient to offer their services to the regulated entities.
So maybe we can pivot back to the actual DORA Edge product, which you've built. What's next on the roadmap?
As I said before, we're super focused on doing everything possible to ensure that the platform itself does what an entity needs to be compliant with the regulation. So we're saying super, super focused on that. So bringing in business automation, permissioning that continues to encourage and enable regulated entities to manage this program cross-functionally. I think there's also advantage as well to think about really strategically what third parties we would want to integrate with, whether they're other governance, risk, compliance tools, whether they are more so on the legal and compliance side, being from a policy and governance perspective. We can really think about how do we want to integrate those so the data flow is really strong and we can be a larger part of the stack for the clients that we work with. So that's a part of it too. In terms of the app itself, so those workflows, thinking about having that audit log in place, everything to ensure that it's really airtight for the purpose of this framework. I think there are many tools who tried to scrap together from the different functionality they had for other frameworks and try to make something that's DORA focused or something that is only for reporting. What we're trying to do is, while entities are going through the exercise of not pulling data, but doing active assessments of their ICT network, how can that information not just live statically, but actually be a dynamic reporting tool and then filter through all of the other more actionable things they need to do annually as a part of their every day as a part of their continuous monitoring and management, is then to pull that into risks and be able to have active risk management, active incident management if and when those arise as well. And then as a part of that, we're also looping it directly to the governance program. So if they have a risk, what is actually the policy document they have in place to ensure that they are mitigating that risk? So bringing in both elements of the ICT network, but also the governance program and having that be harmonious within the platform.
So with the regulation that covers 22,000 financial entities, I know we've thrown that number out a lot, but it is a huge new regulation, right? And with that comes confusion, naturally. So what are the common misconceptions about DORA compliance?
First and foremost, a big part of the regulation and one of the first articles is, what is the scope of this? So who does it actually reach? We've talked about every single regulated financial entity is directly impacted, but to varying degrees. So a small marketplace or an investment tool for B2C clients, that is really different than a global insurance company like I mentioned prior. So their obligations will look a little bit different in practice. So there's that rule of proportionality. And I think one of the misconceptions is that a regulated entity with maybe one or two investment advisors who have a small set of clients who haven't really been subject directly to other frameworks, that this is just another thing that they can kind of shield behind with their smaller size. The fact of the matter is that they do need to be able to have this in place. And granted, their dependence on external providers might be less, or the amount of revenue that they bring in and the services they provide is a lot smaller than larger global firms, but they are still subject to following through the same motions of the larger entities. We've built in the tool the ability to then have the simplified risk framework, Article 16, but also the micro enterprises exemptions as well. So if you are going through the governance module, we can help enable you to grow your business from a policy perspective or governance perspective to mirror the regulation for a larger scope. But actually, if you just want to see what are my current obligations, we have that in place with the ability of having the full visibility into how can I become more secure if I wish to. So I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions. I think there's another one around, of course, right now we're hearing everywhere about AI. So how much should we rely on technology versus the human? We've taken a very strong stance that we have really strong technology that will give you the proper guardrails to build your ICT network and risk management programs, as well as governance program for DORA. But it really is up to the human to interpreting the regulation and ensuring that it fits the size and scope of your organization. So I think the two can be married together in a really synergistic way for the best possible and most efficient outcomes for a regulated entity. But I don't believe that this is just an AI will cover my governance program or they will do the proper assessments. You need to think about what are the use cases for which I use an external provider? How often are we working with a certain asset, and how much coverage do we have to ensure that it will be safe? So I think that's another part of it. But I also think, technology can be leveraged as a tool, and it is not necessarily a Band-Aid. Like, it is actually an enabler to ensure that organizations can be prepared and can be compliant at all times. So I believe that is really the lens that we want to take, where technology is your tool, adopt it, and we will continue as a product team to develop it to make sure that it covers all of the use cases entities have, big and small, across all different sectors of the industry overall.
So if you had 30 seconds with a COO of one of these financial entities that needs to be compliant with DORA, what piece of advice would you give them?
It's almost too late, right? So there was a reporting deadline in April. There are some EU jurisdictions or jurisdictions in the European region who have not yet determined if they will adopt DORA, but I think it's in every regulated entity's best interest to take it seriously and do so now. So I think, there's the reporting element of it, but there's also the exercise of actually doing the ICT mapping and having a really strong sense internally of what is our process and how are we actually going to implement the regulation in our day-to-day. And I think this is a really strong opportunity. While the regulation or the framework itself is quite ambiguous, it is meant to cover 22,000 various organizations. So it is really up to a compliance team and with other technology, but also legal and procurement stakeholders to come together and determine who is our task force, who is going to be who is responsible for executing this from a program standpoint, but also carrying it out in daily operations and keeping it at the forefront of the organization's mind every single day.
I think that's an excellent piece of advice to end on. So for any financial entity needing to find out about DORA compliance, where can they find out more information about DORA Edge specifically?
Head to our website, DORAedge.com. Best place just to get a brief overview of everything that I said that the platform can do, but also more importantly, book a demo or an introductory call with myself or my team. So I think that's a great place to start, and would love to have a dialogue about what the regulated entity has in place so far, where they're looking to continue to develop and mature their governance program.
Marissa, thank you so much for joining us today and doing a deep dive on DORA, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for this episode of Wealth Insider. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find more insights on Performativ.com, and we'll be back soon with more conversations from the people redefining wealth management.